Alrighty, beautiful mingling. Thank you very much, guys. Let me take you back to 2022, and the borders have just opened up, and at that point, I'd shot off to see my family for the first time in 2.5 years. Well, as most of you know, I'm English, but my parents were in England. My brother and my sister-in-law and my niece, who I hadn't met, live in Germany. So we rendezvoused in France, which was great. Beautiful week and a half. It was awesome. And I think at the same time, there was a heat wave there. It was raining heaps here, so it was even more satisfying. We had a beautiful time together, beautiful time reconnecting. And at the end of that trip, I was hopping over to England just for a couple of days to sort some stuff out. And so I took the ferry across the channel. And I knew I was getting the ferry from a place called Caen. And I've done those ferries quite a bit growing up because we do holidays in France. It was really cool growing up. And so I wasn't really thinking about the journey. I just said goodbye to my family. And so you're thinking about that and all the emotions. But then I realized that at the port, it wasn't actually in the city of Caen. It was actually a bit north. And I'm a bit geeky with maps. I like to know where I am and where I'm going. So I've cranked out the Google Maps and I'm looking. And I'm noticing that we're actually coming up through an estuary out towards the sea. And on our left, just as we're hitting the sea, is a wee town called Weestrum. And that town is just this little wee town. It's got nothing really much going on, to be honest. It's pretty quiet. But for me, that town has quite a lot of significance because Weestrum is on the eastern edge of where the Normandy beaches were. And so you had Omaha, Utah, Sword. Well, no, you had Juneau or Gold, and then Sword. And Sword was right next to, one of the 5 beachheads was right next to Weestrum. And that's where my granddad landed in D-Day. And so suddenly, after saying goodbye to my parents and all of this and all the tears and everything, I'm coming out of this estuary onto the channel. And on my left, I can see the beach where Weestrum is. And I've done those beaches with my other set of grandparents. And I know where my granddad landed. And I'm looking at the beach. And suddenly, I'm aware of the seagulls. I'm aware of the smell of the ocean. I'm aware of the water hitting the edges of the boat, water on metal and the crashing sound. I'm aware of all these senses going on. And on the one hand, I'm aware of this kind of surreal, surprising connection with my granddad in that moment, but I'm also aware that I will never understand the cost of what he went through. I hope I never understand. And whilst there are all sorts of conflicts in the world, many at the moment, with that one, war is terrible, full stop, but I see it as, that one in particular, as one where there was such a resistance against a regime which was so intent on evil. And I'm so proud of my granddad for what he did. I really am. He counted the cost and chose to go. And there's a quote by Winston Churchill referring to the RAF and the Battle of Britain as they fought the Luftwaffe in the skies. And Winston Churchill said, "Never was so much owed by so many to so few." And I think of that with my granddad. And that was June 1944, and we go back 7 years, and we have a man called Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German man living in Germany. And the rise of the Nazi Party is just accelerating and accelerating. And Bonhoeffer is a pastor in Germany, and he has seen the church in Germany crumble in appeasement to the regime. There is such a slide going on in the German church overall. But Bonhoeffer, amongst a few brave others, are saying, no, that's not what I believe. I believe in Jesus and I believe in the gospel and I'm not moving. And in 1937, he produced a book, which I'm reliably told by my brother is pronounced Nachfolger, I think. Apologies to any German speakers in the room. Nachfolger. And that means succession. Or probably more helpfully for us in English, it means following. And that book has become known as The Cost of Discipleship, which he was a very good authority to write. And that is our lovely light topic for this morning, which I've been given. Thank you very much, elders. Now that phrase, was very much well known and attributed to Bonhoeffer, takes its roots in Luke chapter 14. Where Jesus is speaking to his disciples and saying, well, and the crowds around actually as well, he's saying, you count the cost of this in daily life before you do it. You weigh up the cost before you do that. You weigh up the cost before you do this. How could you not weigh up the cost before following me? But this theme of the cost of discipleship is bigger than just Luke 14. It is so present in the New Testament. And it is a topic that's been chosen by the elders as part of this series of being set apart. So, I'm aware with this topic it's quite a big one. It could potentially be overwhelming. I've got my knickers in a twist about it a few times over the years. So what we're going to do is we're going to come to 3 verses in a moment, which sum up the cost of discipleship. And we're going to look at those. And it's going to be earthy, and it's going to be gritty, and it's going to be straight up. But my hope is that by the end, we find ourselves drawn closer in intimacy to Jesus. So our 3 verses on the screen, please, Glenn even. Matthew 16:24. Then Jesus told his disciples, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Mark 8:34. And calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Luke 9:23. And he said to all, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Now, some context for these 3 verses before we really get into them. First of all, Jesus and his disciples have just arrived in the district of Caesarea Philippi. And then 4 things become very clear as they are moving around this district. Number 1, the disciples and Jesus are moving from place to place. They are really making a move between these places and covering a lot of ground. Number 2, we are entering the final days of Jesus' life on earth before the resurrection, before the cross and the resurrection, I should say. And as I was reading one of these verses in my Bible, old school one, the paper version, I was reading this verse on the left-hand side, and then on the next part of the page that was open, or the second page, on the right-hand side, I could see the title for Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. And so you're aware that things are building towards what is about to come. Third point, with that momentum building, it just comes through the pages as we get to these stages in the gospel accounts. The kingdom of God is breaking out. Tensions are rising. Jesus is just saying it how it is, very clearly, very openly. And number 4, the disciples, inspired by the Holy Spirit, remember this time vividly. How do we know? They all start to record the same stories in the same order before and after these 3 verses. And that last point is not insignificant. This is true to the extent that if it wasn't Luke's meticulous nature as a physician and his addition of daily to that quotation from Jesus, they would all be word for word the same. Now, after this morning and after lunch afterwards, if I got everyone here to split into groups of 4 and write down an account of what happened at church today, we would have varying accounts with striking similarities and striking differences. And that's healthy and natural, right? Some would be able to describe the color of someone's hair. Others would be thinking about the smells that were going on. Others would be talking about the food. Others would be talking about the worship. There would be all sorts going on, but striking similarities and differences. And this is normal as healthy, as I said, because any judge in any court around the world, if they got witness statement after witness statement with the same description, the same wording, again and again and again, would be thinking something very fishy is going on here. And so with these striking similarities and differences that are going on in the Gospels, whenever the Gospel accounts start mirroring each other, like they are now, in multiple ways, there is something very interesting going on. In this case, a sentence which is repeated practically word for word. My conclusion is that we're hitting on something which is at the very core of following Jesus. And each writer knows it, and they can't leave it out. Now, there'll be some of you here who have already been playing Spot the Difference and noticed the difference of daily. And probably those sorts of characters will be thinking at this point, well, what about John? Where is John? Well, and I mean what I'm about to say with the greatest of the respect to the two individuals involved, which usually, when said by a British person, means they're about to insult you. But I genuinely mean with the greatest of respect. John reminds me very clearly of my wife, Sophie, in some ways. Wait for it, it's good. Yeah, it better be, as someone said. Highly prophetic. An incredible revelation and understanding of the love of God. A pioneer. And also, I love the different personalities of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. John was never created to be someone who colors in inside the lines only. We have creativeness, like just bubbling out. And so John, which was written a bit later than Matthew, Mark, and Luke, I would be surprised if he repeated word for word these sentences the same. That would actually be the shock. Not that he hasn't, it would be the shock that he had. And so climbing out of that rabbit hole of context very quickly and moving on, we come to this sentence from Jesus. And to score some brownie points, I'm going to be a good Baptist this week, unlike Anna 2 weeks ago, and give you 3 points. 3 points. Back to safety. So, the first thing Jesus says, let them deny themselves. If anyone would come after me, let them deny themselves. Now, let's just rule out what Jesus isn't saying with this denying self. He doesn't want to squash us, and he doesn't want to remove who he has made us. However, there can only be one person we serve as God of our lives. If we have placed ourselves in control of our lives, there is no room for Jesus to be there and for his lordship too. Letting Jesus be Lord of our life is a decision which is initially made when we first become a Christian, but it is also one which we continuously make. We deny ourselves to fully allow Jesus. And I think a picture of this that came to mind for me was, imagine like a real nice couch, like 3 cushions, all squishy cushions, like a real nice one where you can just almost just sink into. And if you're there lounging, covering all 3 cushions, well, you're leaving Jesus stood there like a lemon. There's no room for him to sit down and be with you. But instead we can sit up and, maybe we still got a bit of a slouch on and it's still comfortable, but there's room to be with Jesus. And so, yes, it's about his lordship and enabling him to take his rightful place in our lives, but it's also about room for intimacy. If I'm so tunnel visioned on what I want to do and where I'm going to go and I'm not denying myself, there's no room for intimacy There's no room for intimacy or connection with Jesus. So denying ourselves leads to intimacy with God. And as I was reflecting on this whole aspect of denying ourselves, it got me thinking about there are moments which are obvious and almost lumpy moments of denying ourselves. You know those moments where you can see that choice in front of you and you're just like, oh, I know I've got a choice here. Like for some reason, when I have a hot drink, Sophie thinks it tastes nicer than if she had a hot drink. And I say, can I have a sip? And I'm like, oh, you just see that crossroads in front of you. You're so aware of it. But then there are those moments which I would class as missable moments, which isn't technically even a word, missable, but we're going to run with it anyway. Those moments where you don't realize till later, or you need someone who knows you to help you realize, hey, bro, actually, you had a bit of a blind spot there. There are missable moments of denying ourselves. Bonhoeffer actually spoke into this a bit. He said, we must be ready to allow ourselves to be interrupted by God, who will thwart our plans and frustrate our ways time and again, even daily, by sending people across our path with their demands and their requests. We can then pass them by, preoccupied with our important daily tasks, just as the priest, perhaps reading the Bible, passed by the man who had fallen among robbers, which is a reference to the story of the Good Samaritan. I'm reading a book at the moment, I think it's called Generations, by a lady called Jean Twenge. I think that's how you say her name, Twenge. And it's amazing. She's basically done all this analysis on the generations from those who are classified as the silents, to boomers, to Generation Y, and millennials, and Generation Z, and all this stuff. And it's really interesting, really, really interesting. And because of the amount of data out there available at the moment online, This is based on, I think, 37 million people's responses, and there's a lot of data. But she makes she reaffirms a really important point, that we have shifted in Western society from collectivism to individualism. And by that, I mean collectivism, we're thinking about the responsibility to those around us, to our community, to our family, to the greater good. And then to individualism, well, what's my dream? Where can I go? What's possible for me? What do I want to achieve? And both have pros and cons. Both have pros and cons. But I want to speak to those who are particularly my age and younger at the moment. Individualism, which affects all of us in many ways, we can all get caught up in it. But for those of us who are younger, it's all we've known. And it really butts up against denying yourself. Big time. Something for us to watch out for. I planned to mention my granddad at the beginning of this talk about weeks and weeks and weeks ago. And then a week and a half ago, I found out that my grandma, who I think she's like 96 or something, my granddad Ken's widow, 96 going on 137, fiercely independent, highly competent, absolutely smokes me at memory games when it comes to card games and stuff. It's highly embarrassing. She's finally agreed to move out of her home because she thinks she might need a bit of help. So her and my auntie, I love them to bits, they've just been going through the home, and it's like finding the Dead Sea Scrolls in the desert. There's all sorts of stuff coming out. And one of them was this letter, or I should say a sealed envelope by my granddad addressed to his father. And so they opened it up, and it was written 2 days before D-Day. And it was this 10-page letter in case he died, written at the age of 22. And so me and my brother got this on WhatsApp about a week and a half ago, and, just hit us like a freight train. Incredible to read it. But one of the things that in Ken's letter, he wrote, and actually, Glenn, can we get the photo on the screen, please, bro? This is him when he signed up illegally, too young for the war. And then a few years later, this was when he was 17, I believe. So a few years later, in 1944, 5 years later, he wrote this at the age of 22. Thanks, Glenn, that's all good. And at one point, he posed this question to his father. He said, "Why me?" Predicting the question that his father would ask. And he answered his question, Ken did, by writing this: "Well, I'm young, I'm single, I'm keen, and it's my Christian duty." And it really got me thinking on a number of levels. My brother and I didn't realize how much our granddad actually knew the Lord, and we thought it was just a nominal faith. We didn't know. We didn't know if it was just ticking the box and going to church, or whether there was a real faith there, but boy, it came through in those 10 pages. But it got me thinking, and particularly again for my age group and younger, when was the last time we used the word duty? When was the last time we used the word duty? As a Christian, my life is about a person, God, and a cause, his kingdom, which is far greater than just myself. Again, does he want to squash me in the middle of that or lose my personality? Absolutely not. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made and loved by God. However, there is more. And at this point, it would be good to circle back to this word cost, because as soon as we deny ourselves, cost kicks in. And where there is a cost, there is a loss. Dietrich Bonhoeffer did not live in safety. He did not live a comfortable life. And he stood up for the gospel, and he did not live long. He was executed days before the liberation of the area he was in, after being imprisoned finally. Executed out of spite, probably, we think. And he won't get that life back. There's no turning back the clocks. There's no second chance. He didn't get resurrected a few days later, although, again, there's many stories of people being resurrected in the 2,000 years since Jesus died, even starting from the moments after he was resurrected. But he didn't get that. And there is a cost. And with a cost, there is a loss. However, I can hear some people thinking right now, does God redeem? Well, surely. Yes, he does. Absolutely. Can he redeem, and does he redeem? Yes. Take Joseph or Job as examples in the Bible of when he does this. And we could fill the rest of this day with stories just from this room of when God has redeemed. I love Romans 8:28, where Paul writes, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. Checkmate, full stop, game, set, match. God is the Redeemer. On top of that, we have truth in Scripture, such as Paul's statement earlier on in Romans 8, where he said, "For I consider the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing to the glory that awaits us." Later on, the writer in Hebrews chapter 13 has this little snippet where the writer puts this, or phrases it in this way. "For here we have no lasting city, but we seek the city that is to come." The cost of discipleship and denying ourselves as part of that is so centered upon trading in our limited perspective for God's eternal perspective, whilst being grounded in the nitty-gritty of life. Denying yourself only makes sense with this eternal perspective. Eyes on Jesus and being drawn into the Father's embrace. And so that is kind of like a snapshot of denying ourselves. And then we think, oh, okay, right, breathe. Whew. And then Jesus comes up and takes it to a whole new other level. So make sure you strap yourselves in for this one. Because he comes along and says, after that, if anyone would come after him, let them deny themselves and take up their cross. That is some statement to make. And we can easily miss as well that Jesus said this before he'd even gone to the cross. And he said it to crowds. Like, this is an opening line of a speech, a preach to crowds. What an opening line. Only his closest disciples, which we know from reading literally the few verses beforehand, know that he is about to die and rise again. And even then we get the impression that with the disciples it's kind of gone over their heads. Come and die painfully and follow me. I wasn't expecting that reaction. You can't dilute or sugarcoat this line. You can't brush it aside. It is what it is. So why are we all here? Why are we all here? I mean, think about it. There's so many elections happening in the world this year. It's been known as a year of elections. And think tanks are beavering away, and political parties are thinking about what are we going to say and how are we going to connect with the voters. Imagine if one of them came out with the line of, hey, I know, I've got it. Let's put out on the front of our manifesto, come, deny yourself, and die painfully and follow us. It is the worst manifesto line you could probably think of for a government. So what's going on? Well, let's break this down. To start with, this world is beautiful and broken. It is a masterpiece and it is marred. And that includes every human. We're all made in the image of God, deeply, profoundly, intensely, jealously loved by God. But we've all messed up, starting from Adam and Eve. We've all fallen short. We've all sinned. And the world is hostile to the person and way of Jesus. So when Jesus says, take up your cross, he's acknowledging that following him will lead to dangerous situations and dangerous moments due to the hostility of so much of this world against him and his ways. Jesus is not recklessly chucking his followers under the bus with a sadistic lack of care. He's being open. He's being direct. He's being honest. He's being all those things to the dangers of following him through persecution, which for some, like Bonhoeffer, not all, but for some has led to death. Jesus is totally upfront. You know, he's not kind of got this piece of paper which he's not letting you focus on, and he's saying, yeah, you know, you'll be loved, and there's a good father, and good gifts, and heaven, and yeah, sign on the dotted line, and we'll tell you the rest later. If you go through the gospel messages, Jesus does not leave any stone unturned as to what it entails to follow him. He's totally transparent. He's totally real. And he's issuing a call or invitation to embrace God's will, no matter what the cost. Now, some interesting things about that. Firstly, Jesus never asks us to do anything that he doesn't actually understand himself or can relate to through his earthly life. In the area of suffering and persecution, he got it all. I was thinking about this, and I play five-a-side football on a Wednesday, as I think I've mentioned before, and probably made a few confessions around that in previous preaches. And here's another one. We had this player join us recently, and a nice guy, chirpy and everything, good footballer, but just had the tendency at times to call us to work a bit harder fitness-wise, but didn't quite match up to that level that he was asking himself. And it grinded my gears. It really got me. And that sort of thing usually does. And so I was kind of just stewing on this internally for 2 or 3 weeks. And then he did it another week, and I gave him a real dark look, which was not great. And then I finally realized, well, hang on, God, what are you saying? And what's your heart for him? And finally got myself in gear. But that thing still frustrates me. I still don't like it, and I never have, and I never will on a sports pitch. And I was thinking on the flip side, think old mate Richie McCaw and, the good old days when the Crusaders could actually win a game. And in that 2011 World Cup, he played for more than half it with a broken foot and injections, and he didn't say a word. And boy, do we have so much respect for that guy, but even him does not come close to Jesus in my eyes. Jesus is the ultimate leader. He's the ultimate one with integrity and walks the walk and talks the talk at the same time. There's simply no one like him. And here's another thing. By specifically mentioning, take up your cross, and think about this. Jesus didn't say, hey, deny yourself and prepare for pain, or there will be suffering. I mean, he did mention suffering in other verses, but in this particular one, he says, take up your cross, which is not only just a shocking phrase, but fascinating. By specifically saying the cross, which is so inseparably linked to resurrection and the third day, Jesus is promising us and meeting us with life in the midst of cost and death. Whenever there is cost or pain or death from following Jesus, expect new life in the midst of it. Expect new life. As we join with Jesus in dying to self, we join with Jesus in coming alive. It is a kingdom principle that cannot be shaken, it cannot be moved, it cannot be budged. Will it happen in our timing always? No way. Sometimes, but not always. And he forms us, and he molds us, and he grows us, and he refines us, and he builds us up, all with an eternal perspective again. And he does this amidst our tears and the searing pain that we can go through as we follow him. Let's not trivialize that or make this sound triumphant in a way that we're ignoring the pain and the hard times. He does it in the midst of it. And there's so much in the Bible about how he does that and his heart for doing so. But I love Psalm 126, verse 5. Those who sow in tears will reap in joy. Not those who are crying, get off the kitchen floor, but those who are crying on the kitchen floor, Jesus is with you and meeting you there and bringing about his good for you. We are in the family business of resurrection power and new life. My granddad, Ken, at the end of his letter, he signed off with this phrase which almost had a haunting effect on me, like it really struck me. He signed off his letter by saying, and this is under the assumption that he is dead, I am no more dead than Christ himself. I am no more dead than Christ himself. There's a 22-year-old writing just incredibly, led by the Spirit, preaching the gospel to his family, the good news. This verse can't be diluted or sugar-coated. What it can be, though, is held whilst never losing sight of Jesus. That's how we stay on track with this verse. And when we get to heaven where there is no more sin and every tear is wiped away, and we finally see Jesus face to face with his arms outstretched, we will see his scars. The gospel accounts tell us that the disciples saw the resurrected Jesus, and not only did they see his scars, and not only did he show them, but they touched the scars on his hands or his wrists, his feet, and from the spear in his side. There is no mention of the scars on his back from when he was scourged by the whipping of the soldiers. There's no mention of his face from being beaten. But there is mention of the scars from the cross. A stunning, powerful visual reminder of his great love for us, etched permanently onto our Savior's resurrection body for eternity. Every tear wiped away from my eye and your eye, but not Jesus' scars. Jesus is not ashamed of his scars from doing his Father's will. And as we deny ourselves and we take up our cross and follow Jesus, we pick up scars too. Paul wrote to the Galatians saying, I bear on my body the marks of Jesus. And I was listening to a talk given to a bunch of youth workers and youth pastors years ago in England. And the speaker, and not in a trivial way, but he really wanted to get people to grasp like the depth of this. He said, describe to me, shout out to me what Paul's back reminds you of from all his whipping and all the beatings. And someone shouted out saying, a London tube map with the lines and the dots and the colors. And I don't want to unpack that anymore. It's that balance between, I'm aware people are sensitive, but this is the reality. This is a man who could barely write a letter after all he went through. He was so hurt. And we pick up scars, whether internal or external, like Paul's description, or both. There's a quote I heard recently, and it kind of depicts Christians against believers and against disciples when they're really all the same, but it's trying to make a point. So stay with it if you can. But Christians have bumper stickers and catchphrases. Believers have creeds and promises. Disciples have scars and stories. Another person who I deeply respect, who's been in church planting for decades across the world with her husband, she said, if you ever see a Christian leader trying to depict themselves or present themselves in a way as if they don't have any scars, run a country mile. Don't trust them. It really stuck with me. There is an inevitability to the cost of discipleship to Jesus. Now, does this mean we're defeatists or pushovers? Oh, no. No way. Amidst the pain and the snotty tears and the empty tank and the hurt and the compounded weariness, the wounds, our spirit witnesses with what Paul wrote to the Corinthians. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. I'm going to give you a bit of the extended version. It feels like a Lord of the Rings preach in length, and we're going to go for the extended version, I think. There are people in this land waiting to come alive to this invitation. And I would propose to you that young men would be overrepresented in that number. From what I've seen and heard in the UK and in here in New Zealand, there is an underrepresentation of young men at times in churches. And when I was 18, I think about how I craved purpose, and I still do now. And that was only satisfied in Jesus when I became a Christian. For me, before I was a Christian, it was either join the army or do organized crime. That was the only two things I could see as possible career options. I think I could have done all right at both, but we'll never know. And as men, we have a higher propensity for certain things, particularly risk-taking and doing stupid things at times. Despite what society says, there is a difference between men and boys. Men and boys. There's that too, men and women. Both equal in value in God's eyes, but there's a difference. You know, we had a young lad at summer camp just been, and me and him and a few others, we went and made a beeline for the nearest hill, sort of thing like, right, where's the biggest one? This was at O'Kane's Bay. That one, right. And we just went for it. And at one point we reached a fence, and we all picked our spot to hop over this fence. And, you're thinking, okay, everyone's pretty mature in this group. We're going to hop over and, do our thing. The only problem was this fence had barbed wire on it. So we're all looking to hop over, and this guy has found a bit of a rickety old section on his fence, and he's gone for it anyway. And you're just like, oh, gosh. And sure enough, he slips and lacerates himself above the nipple a bit. And we followed policies and procedures. His mum knew immediately, all that stuff. We're all watertight. Don't sharpen your pencils. We were all good. And he could have got stitches if he wanted to. But for him, he just had like the coolest scar now. Like, he was just loving it. He was frothing on it. It was quite amusing. Ah, boys. And even in the Second World War, there are photos, and this is so twisted in many ways, but there are photos. If you go on Google and type in German officers World War II, you will notice that a lot of the portraits have scars around the mouth. Well, I shouldn't have done that. Around the mouth. At which point you're thinking, well, what on earth has gone on here? Well, they used to do fencing quite a lot in the higher echelons of German society amongst the guys. And they wore these goggles, which, if anyone's watched Wind in the Willows, it reminds me of Toad when he's driving the cars, like these ridiculous goggles. And they do the fencing, and they'd want to get cut as almost a badge of honor or a sign of manliness. And then not only that, they would stuff horsehair in their wounds so the scars would become more prominent. Weird. Like, just stupid. But when we step into that twistedness and we examine what's going on at the root of that, well, they want to be men. They want to be men. They are looking to find themselves. And even amongst gangs today, there's so many factors as to why gangs exist. Absence of fathers, all sorts of reasons. And I was watching a documentary into the life of a gang recently, and they just nailed it. This guy who was in the gang said, for many of us, something along these lines, it's the only visible or accessible pathway for us as young men for having strength, nerve, risk-taking, courage, and attainment being achieved. It is the only place where a life can be laid down for a higher cause than themselves. Do we need as men to hear about the radical love of God for us? Oh yeah, full volume, every day, forever. But too many men have not heard, pick up your cross, deny yourself and follow me. Come die to yourself. Come die to the old ways for a man and a cause that is infinitely worth it. Worship crew, if you'd like to come up, please. Those two words, follow me, are an open invitation for everyone. From Jesus to every single person on the planet. And these last words of follow me, I think I've preached on just those two words before, loaded with discipleship context and meaning and the whole paradigm of discipleship. Love it. Absolutely love it. Froth on it. Jesus ties it all back to following him. And look, we can get caught up in comparison and am I doing enough and what does this mean look like in my life? Let me make it very simple. Keep saying yes to Jesus and his ways. The cost will find you. You'll naturally find yourself denying yourself. If you want to make this really simple, just keep saying yes to Jesus and his ways. You know, for some of you, I really felt as I was reading out that scripture from Paul, where he talks about how he's not fully defeated and squashed. It feels like some of us will be thinking, how dare I relate myself to Paul? How dare I consider myself able to witness with those words of Paul? Each journey is different. And actually, if we're looking to reach the same level of suffering as Paul, it's a bit masochistic, and also it's going ahead of what Jesus might have said to you, which is religion. It's striving. Keep saying yes to Jesus and his ways, and it will find you. We start getting the cost of discipleship as our hearts are captivated by Jesus. I'll finish with the words of John 16:33. In this world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world.